Good morning, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with a hurricane outlook and discussion recorded on June 24th, 2023, around 11 a.m. Eastern Time. In today's video, we're going to be discussing Tropical Storm Sydney intensifying in the Atlantic Basin. Is it going to be a threat for land down the road? So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight into everything. Taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic this morning, we notice it is fairly active. We got two tropical systems currently ongoing. We still have Tropical Storm Brett, which we'll talk about here in just a brief second. And we also have Tropical Storm Sydney as well in the Atlantic. You can actually see the exposed low-level circulation move out from underneath the deep convection. We'll talk about why here in a minute. We'll have to watch Sydney down the road for potential land impacts. So let's go ahead and look at these storms in greater detail. So taking a look here at Tropical Storm Brett this morning. This is still a storm at this point and is still classifiable as a tropical cyclone. It has a fair good amount of convection associated with it. However, if we look here, you notice these outflow boundaries that are emanating away from the storm's core at this given point in time. And what this indicates to me is that the storm is going to be continuing to weaken as it progresses throughout the next several days. In fact, you can see here that it is bringing some heavier rain showers and some gusty winds to portions of the ABC Islands at this point. And this will continue moving westward into Central America over the next couple of days, where it could provide some gusty winds and heavy rainfall. But the storm is well on its way to making its final demise at this point. And at this time, there is no chance that the storm is going to regenerate after the next few days. Conversely, out here in the Atlantic main development region, we are watching Tropical Storm Sydney this morning. You notice first thing right off the bat, the low-level circulation is getting ejected towards the north and west of the deepest convection, which is associated down here. This is our low-level center where my cursor is, and you notice that it is getting ejected away, flung out from the deepest convection to the south of the storm. And this is mostly a response because of strong upper level winds in the area that is preventing the alignment of the thunderstorms underneath this low level circulation. And this is likely to continue being the case for the next several days. You notice that the upper level cloud flow here is generally one that indicates a very sheared pattern. You notice these tops of the thunderstorms to the north of the storm are getting sheared off towards the north and east. And that is what is going to be continuing to happen as we progress throughout the next several days. So the storm is likely going to encounter very unfavorable conditions for the next while. Looking at the current National Hurricane Center forecast for Tropical Storm Sydney, the maximum sustained winds have increased to 60 miles per hour and a pressure down to 1,001. This was making a run at hurricane status last night, but the shear and dry air disrupted the storm. This is expected to continue moving off towards the north and west during the next several days, but as indicated by the National Hurricane Center, this is expected to become post-tropical within the next 72 hours and a remnant low within the next 96 to 120 hours or the next 4 to 5 days. So again, the storm is expected to continue well to the south of Bermuda, which is located right here, but it is going to start to take the turn towards the north. And once this does so, I think that is when we're going to have to watch for the potential for the storm to make a comeback. And although not explicitly forecast, I'm going to show you right now that I think there's a very real threat for the storm to make a comeback as we progress throughout next week. So what we're looking at here is the H-Wharf 200 millibar winds. So this is looking at the wind speed and direction noted by the streamlines here at about 34,000 feet or so. So up about the cruising altitude of airliners these days. What we notice right now is that our storm is beginning to encounter the very unfavorable conditions brought upon by this trough to the north. And that is actually going to be increasing the shear over top of the storm as Sydney begins to go further towards the north and west here during the next several days. And in fact, here within about the next 30 hours, you can see this is when its most unfavorable position would be. This is relatively a fairly strong shear environment at this point with about 25 to 30 knots of shear. And this would completely kill off the vortex, which is what the National Hurricane Center is currently projecting at this point. However, as the storm begins to move slowly, kind of just drifting around to the north, it does find itself in a little bit more of an optimal position where the streamlines here are actually coming out of the south and kind of curving around like this. This is actually when our storm finds itself in a little bit more of a favorable environment here within about 60 hours or so that allows for some gradual organization of the storm within the next couple of days. Now, our vortex remains relatively weak, and it remains to be seen if indeed there is going to be a vortex at all that survives this initial bout of shear. If there is, however, it will find itself within a more optimally favorable position within about 5 days or so. And the H4 forecast calls for the storm to then once again deepen as a result of the trough to the north here. This trough is actually weakening, but it is going to be providing ample jet amplification on the northern side. And so this is actually going to increase the amount of poleward outflow over the next several days. And so our storm, as it interacts with this jet here to the north, it actually begins to intensify. And you can see the island of Bermuda is right here. And this is the northeast United States coast here in Nova Scotia right there. And the storm is relatively in an optimal position to intensify at this point. And most of the reliable forecast guidance today continues to suggest the same bout of intensification within the next several days. So while the official Hurricane Center forecast is calling for dissipation, I'm not so sure about that right now. We're looking at the GFS 500 millibar geopotential height anomalies here, and what is important to note is we're going to be looking at the steering for our storm during the next couple of days, because while it's no threat to land, at least in the short and near term, I do think that if this storm is able to survive, there may be a very real threat to the Northeast US, Bermuda, and potentially the Canadian Maritimes, including Nova Scotia, during the next couple of days. Right now, what's generally steering the storm is a weakness to the north of the storm, allowing our storm to gradually gain latitude throughout the next several days. And this pattern is very well forecast and won't change a whole lot. But within about 4 to 5 days, a ridge of high pressure builds over the Canadian high seas here in the high seas of the Atlantic. And this is what's known as a blocking pattern. This begins to block our storm from just turning out to sea like this. And we've also got this trough here in the upper levels with an area of low pressure moving off towards kind of the north and east like this. So these two steering flows are what's going to be working on our storm during the next several days. And in fact, if you take a look here at the sounding for our storm, you notice that generally speaking, you've got southerly winds here aloft, which is going to carry the storm to the north at this point. However, in kind of the little mid-range here, you've got winds that are actually out of the southwest here, which means you'd get more of a northwesterly trajectory to the steering component as this progresses forward. So not only is our storm going to slow down, but it is actually going to drift a little bit to the west. And you can see that very well forecast here in the GFS. Now, if we look here, this is at the 5-day point. We'll take another area sounding here and look at where our storm could be. At this point, you've still got more of a southerly flow here, which is going to be carrying our storm straight north. It's not this clean northeast recurve out to sea. And this is actually what's been indicated by some of the reliable guidance over the last couple of days. And this trough of low pressure may also help to swing the storm back towards the west if it is able to interact with this cyclone, which means that there is an increasing threat for portions of the Northeast US, Nova Scotia, and the rest of the Canadian Maritimes. So overall, looking at the GFS ensembles here, we notice that there is a fairly good clustering of members at this point, with an increasing threat to Nova Scotia. This is particularly important because, again, there's a lot of sensitivity within the track here. And you can see a track that on the GFS mean would carry this storm kind of away from direct impacts to Nova Scotia, but then more towards the rest of the Canadian Maritimes. And then there's also some members here that get it increasingly close to Maine as well. So there is some track sensitivity within this overall forecast. The model forecast track for 12Z today has more of an increasing threat for the island of Bermuda initially. The UK Met model is right now kind of the closest right now, bringing it within about just 100 miles or less of Bermuda, while the official National Hurricane Center forecast does call for the storm to weaken within about 4 days or so and no longer pose a threat. Again, some of the more reliable guidance today has suggested otherwise. So again, there's no significant immediate threat for Bermuda or the Northeast US or Nova Scotia, but I do think there is at least some risk worth mentioning over the next couple of days. But we're still roughly about 6 to 7 days away from any potential impacts towards this part of the world. So we still have lots of time to monitor this. So just a real quick look here in the Eastern Pacific Basin, we also have a few additional systems that are set to develop over the next couple of days. We have a tropical wave here that will likely be designated Invest 92E. I think it's 92 or 93E out here in the Eastern Pacific Basin. This is not really likely to threaten land at the moment, and then we'll be watching another system behind that one as well, with currently a low chance of formation. But we had a lot to watch over the next several days in both basins, obviously. First of all, with Sydney here in the Atlantic, and then 2 more systems that could develop in the Eastern Pacific Basin as well. So it's going to be quite active throughout the next several weeks. All right. With that being said, I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. God bless everyone. Take care. I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.